Okay, so we're losing a limb. We have a phantom limb today. Christopher Calloway of Creator Talks podcast is usually joining us, but he's not here today. So whenever we do another Kirby talk, we will reconvene and, bring the, Three Musketeers, the Brotherhood of Kerbology together once again. I have the original issues of OMAC, but for today, just so I don't have to go through these copies and tear them apart more than they already are, I have this trade paperback version, which has a printing error, which I want to talk about. So
I guess I might as well share that I'm going through the hardcover compilation. I started picking up hardcovers when my kids were born, and I started reading comics with my kids because I didn't want to be going through the original comics with my kids, who were very grabby when it came time to read.
I wanted to bring this up because I don't know, we might skip over it, so I'm just going to get it over with. This new trade paperback of OMAC, which came out, fall of last year, has a printing error in issue number 6, where issue number 6 is the only OMAC issue that doesn't have a double page spread. We've talked about these 100 times over our discussions, splash page, double page spread for page 2 and 3. This does not exist in issue number 6. This is a top wide panel of a 5-panel page. And then you get to this part right here. This panel right here that I've marked is not in any original Jack Kirby OMAC issue. So I think this is someone who either went to Kirby's deleted scenes and found scrap art and just replaced it, or someone's out here doing fake Kirby art for this Kirby collection.
While you're saying that, I was interested. I pulled mine out. My version has it as well.
And so I'll pull out the original one.
Yeah.
So you have that splash page, normal, that's there. And then you have the page that I was talking about. So if you see that top panel, that's what they use as the double page spread.
Did you look into this and see if you could find any information? Or
this was something that I found out about recently. I've read the book a few times, but I've never put this trade together.
Yeah.
And looked at it side by side. I was just doing it as a review, and then I got to issue 6 and that moment hit me, and I looked it up and I couldn't find anything. Like even, a Goodreads review, I couldn't find any detail that said, hey, the printing is different, we changed it. Tomorrow's didn't have anything, the Kirby Museum didn't have anything. I'm glad I'm not the only one. Like, good thing mine isn't like a Twilight Zone copy.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, I told you that I haven't done any research, but I have my suspicions that around this time, Marvel was doing a lot of 2-page spreads that looked to me like 1 page blown up. And when you look at that as a 2-page spread, it feels pretty detailed compared to, just a 2/6 of a regular page grid. So right. That's really interesting to me.
And they edited some of the text boxes, so there's some digital editing going on as well for these reproductions. That said, for once, the recoloring isn't that bad. So normally recoloring, they'll change entire color concepts, but for this, not that bad. Just that one printing is weird to me, and I just wanted to cover that before we go into the actual book. So issue 1 of OMAC is one of my favorite first issues of all time. This book ran from 1974 to 1975 during his time at DC Comics. And one of my favorite things about this cover is that it's uncharacteristically bare for a Kirby cover, right? Like, it's just this guy with a mohawk and a woman in a box.
Bizarrely contorted. until you realize
Yeah.
it's not a contortion.
Again, I have notes throughout all of this, and we brought up the same thing with the Eternals book, but who is this book for? Is this for children? Is it just? I think it's just Jack telling stories. I don't think you can stop him. Jack's stories don't have any age gap. As you can see, like there are issues where people are being sold. Like the body transplant people. So it's like this isn't exactly, like for children. People who are like comics are just for kids. That's a lie in this case.
Well, yeah, this first issue is about super sophisticated inflatable dolls for men, basically, right?
It reminded me, and there's a moment later on that covers this, but they kind of remind me of those dolls from Dark Knight Returns. And also there's that scene with Selena Kyle's escort service where she sends out people and then the Joker has one of them perform a political assassination. I'm thinking this company, what is it, Pseudo People Inc. nice going, Jack. They use them for
Joker hired their services for
with his like mind control lipstick. Even this double page spread, if we're talking about double page spreads, this one in OMAC, look at that. Like this guy with a mohawk, this modern day Mars, this god of war shows up, kicks down the door, and there are these humanoid, these women just pouring out of boxes, and
women body parts.
Some of them are dismembered, some of them are in kind of assembled. It's jarring.
This was a comic I tried reading with my kids when they were little. We would just pick stuff up off the shelf and give it a try, and this one we read and we were all like, oh boy, this isn't Spider-Man or the Fantastic Four.
No. When did you read this yourself?
In full, just when you got in touch a couple of weeks ago.
One of the great things about this first issue is something that comics of that time didn't really do all that often, is non-linear storytelling. With that double page spread, it even says this is the climax of the story. It shows you the ending, and then it goes to this lead up.
I think it would be worth talking before we get into this about Mark Evaniers' introduction in my hardcover. I don't know if you had something like this, but Mark kind of explains the scenario for how this book came about. And when Kirby was with DC, he was contractually obligated to produce 15 pages a week. And at the time that pages were needed, in other words, this book was needed, his books had been getting canceled. He'd been doing The Demon and Mr. Miracle, and doing Commandy, but his sort of New God saga was getting canceled one at a time, and he needed to produce pages. And this story, OMAC, was something he'd kind of envisioned as a Marvel Captain America of the future story.
Yes.
And it just didn't quite come together in the ways Jack had imagined, it sounds like. And so he just kind of put it on the back burner. And so now he needs an additional 15 pages a week. And so he pulled this concept back out with the idea being, it's the Superman character, right, of the future. And one reason I bring this up is when I think of some of those early Captain America stories before he even had his own title, and so it's just 10-page stories. There were stories where he's slugging it out with a dozen, villainous army people in corridors and things. Yeah. And I thought, oh, that totally all fits together. I can see it now. The difference being that OMAC is sort of the superhumanly strong. You know, Captain America is superhumanly strong, but OMAC is a one-man army. And so, you know, Captain America might have had 6 guys piled on him, and OMAC has 18 guys piled on him. And then that got me thinking how I think I've seen scenes like that from the old Fantastic Four issues with, you know, people piling on the Thing. And so for me, this was kind of an interesting insight how this came from that lineage.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. And I made a note of it where it's another super soldier. You know, Jack seemed to go to super soldiers whenever, you know, Captain America, and then when he and Joe Simon couldn't work on Captain America for Timely, they went over and did Fighting Americans. So it was their satire super soldier. And then, you know, it is Captain America of the future. That's the perfect descriptor for it. But his shield, instead of being an actual, you know, metallic shield, it's this satellite that collects data and then imbues him with cosmic strength. Even Buddy Blank's origin is pretty much the same. You know, it's this like kind-hearted nobody type character who's
picked on by the bullies.
That's a loaded scene too. There's a lot of you know, you get to that scene and either Jack witnessed it or he personally experienced it. We all know Jack Kirby was the type to hit back, but there's a great detail where there's this guy who picks on Buddy Blank, and then his boss shows up and blames him. You know, Buddy Blank is the victim here, dude. And then he's like, you have a persecution complex. The guy's name is Mr. Fox. And throughout my research, I've realized that Joe Simon and Jack Kirby met at the offices of this guy named Victor Fox. And he was the guy who was the original king of comics. But instead of Kirby, instead of having this high page count doing all of the work, he was just like this squat dude who puffed on cigars and walked around the office saying, I'm the king of comics, you know? And even Tomorrow's published an interview with Joe Simon, and he's like, that's all the guy would do. He would just walk around, puff on cigars, and then he like left to go like become a millionaire or something. He dropped comics and we never heard from him again. So Jack brings in some real world influence there.
And getting back to it being a super soldier, I want to point out that there's a genius scientist who invented the technology to give birth to the super scientist, and that scientist wound up paying the ultimate price so that his creation can live on to pursue the, you know, those amazing goals.
What did we talk about recently that had Machine Man has this exact same arc,
right?
And then Eternals kind of has the same thing too, with the father, the scientist, the researcher. He kind of sacrifices himself so his daughter can go free. Things, you know, the Global Peace Agency in this is one of the. What did you think about them?
It's funny you mentioned that. For some reason, I've been reading a lot unrelated to this about ideas of perspective and, you know, storytelling as, you know, not just comic books, but news or, you know, politics. This idea that people shape their storyline with themselves as the heroes or the ones who are right, and that creates this flip side of villainizing people who think differently or come from different perspectives. And so he introduces it very cleanly and just states, you know, these guys, they're out to make the world better, make people safe. And on the surface, that's great. And on the surface, that's kind of what comics do, you know, is you know who the good guy is and who the bad guy is. But all that time, since we've also talked about Kirby sometimes tweaking that and sometimes presenting someone as a hero and then you learning they're not so heroic, or you meet these villains, but then you kind of get to know them and you see that they're not so villainous. And so the whole time I was reading this, I'm thinking, well, they're presented as this ideal perfection, but are they? And I'm waiting, to see how that plays out. And having read the whole story, I think that wasn't the intention for me to even consider that. I think he was trying to just say these guys are the ideal and they are this great thing.
But their whole, they say we cover our faces because we represent all people. I get the idea of that, and that sounds, that follows the idea for peace, and it just sounds like some kind of cult-like indoctrination. Like everyone who enlists is like brainwashed into saying we have to say the same thing, we have to think the exact same way, we cover our faces so there's no accountability.
We have to all look the same,
yeah.
Right? And and I think that's part of the reason for my skepticism as I read through is I don't know that that's the best way to do it, guys.
Yeah. I read in issue 3, this is the first time I've realized it, but in issue 3, at some point, OMAC makes an offhanded comment that large armies are outlawed. So the only way for them to have any kind of army is if they create a one-man army corps. I'm trying to find it. It's issue 3, page 5, and then they kind of go back to it on page 9.
And we should share what these guys look like, right? With their orange faces,
all wearing the same thing. There's a woman global peace agency agent who shows up to. I don't understand this part. Jack brings up, we'll go back to the peace agents in a minute. I don't understand. They have computer, algorithm, parents chosen by algorithm. If you join the global peace agency, you have random people. These are just random people. These aren't agents. How do they enlist? Oh, wait, no, that's Kafka. Never mind. It's these people up here. They enlist, they become OMAC's parents, and Jack never touches on this again. There are a lot of threads he plays with, but the idea that, I don't know, to me, the peace agency feels like a cult. This is a cult. I get that they're in the market for peace, but to what extent? What are they doing? How do they get to this point?
Those parents were another kind of little beeping in my head going, is this right? They introduce, oh, these guys will be your family now. And then they're, oh, look how sweet they are. And they just want to give you love. And in a horror movie, that those are the ones that are going to turn on you and try to murder you. But in this, nothing played out that way. It was just, oh, I could use love.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about OMAC, other than Captain America is a 3-dimensional person. OMAC is, throughout this story, he does what he's supposed to do. He's used for the purposes of the Global Peace Agency. He doesn't really have any needs or wants. If you read the letters pages, a lot of people are like, give him like a sidekick or something. Like, this guy's so boring. And then, whoever responds to the letters gives a snarky response. But OMAC's purpose is just to go out and fight for peace. And for the people listening, I'm doing air quotes.
What did you think of his origin, where, he's just this little punky, guy that's bullied, and then all of a sudden he turns into OMAC and he starts pounding on everybody, and it took a while to go, what just happened? How did this just happen? And in the last page, in about 2 panels, they explain what you mentioned earlier, that there's this humongous satellite up in space that beamed a magic power beam down on him that transformed him, not unlike Shazam is transformed by lightning, right? Into basically a completely different person. And we learn later that when he's transformed back, he doesn't even realize he's been OMAC or what OMAC has done. so for me, that was a little jarring. I just kind of went, this is a Kirby comic, I'll go with it. But
Yeah.
I don't know that storytelling worked, it's most powerfully for me.
I mean, we talked about it where, he's used for the purposes of the peace agency. And I feel like that's what that is. This guy, Buddy Blank, while being turned into OMAC, saved his life. He doesn't really get a say in it. Steve Rogers got to say, I volunteer for the super soldier serum. This guy he's in a life or death situation. He's about to be killed. So that whole thing that you mentioned about, it's a Kirby comic, I'll go with it. Yeah, it's this great moment where this small dude gets turned into a modern day god of war. Like when he first shows up, look at him. He's doing like, deadlift squats, and he's about to take down 18 guys at one time.
Yeah.
And
now
there's this great sequence where he falls into this pit of fire. I guess this is where they build the pseudo people, and he squats and jumps and then knocks out all of these guys at once. It's really kinetic, but it's so sudden. It doesn't really give you time to digest anything.
Before that, they did show a clip of this agency and the scientists in charge of this technology saying, we've picked out someone for our one-man army. I'm still unclear how they picked this one. I'm unclear why they can only pick one, why it wouldn't be in their best interest to have more than one.
Do you think it's because he's a janitor? The whole idea, I guess the stereotypical idea of the janitor is not someone people really notice. So if you're going to try to pretty much body snatch someone, it's better to get the guy that like no one's going to look twice at.
I honestly don't think these are questions to ask, because I don't think they were asked upon the creation,
Right. I mean, that's the thing, right? Buddy Blank, his name is Blank. Kirby didn't even really give him a name. He's just, let me impress my story upon you. And then he's just a guy who has things happen to him.
So I want to talk a little about Kirby's storytelling. And this, I would say, explosions all around him. And just the way he put that all together is just lovely.
Melancholic
lovely storytelling
guy not looking at explosions. I love that sequence, and that's at the beginning of issue 1, I think.
Yeah, that's on page 5, and we see that in every action movie that comes out now.
There was an interview that you can find on the Kirby Museum. I forget which one it is. There's one from 1990 where he talks about OMAC and how he wants to always be 30 years ahead of everything. And then they mention everything that you mentioned, including virtual reality, is real now. There's a moment where he's talking about how people ask him, hey, do you know that some film directors are using your comics as influences? And he's like, I don't really pay attention to that, So that thing you mentioned, yeah, it's totally possible. The guy walking away from explosions, OMAC is kind of
setting the explosion and then just walking away like it's just another day.
Right. One character we haven't talked about is Lila, who's one of the pseudo people, but you don't know that until 3 or 4 pages in. And she's the only person who is ever, quote unquote, nice to Buddy Blank. So even as OMAC, that makes me think that part of Buddy Blank still exists. I don't know if OMAC is just a blank slate who shows up and he's here to do whatever the peace agency wants. And he's covering so many topics that are still relevant today. Issue 1 had it dealt with, it was like corporate culture and how they don't care about you, and dealing with political assassinations and this cult like peace agency. Then in issue 2 he's talking about wealth distribution and how it's this guy, there's a character named Mr. Big. Jack Kirby kind of puts all of the evil rich guy stereotypes onto this guy. He rents a city, pays everyone's taxes for a year, and now he can do whatever he wants. Which, weirdly enough, even the way he gets arrested, you feel like he's not going to be in jail for that long, and that's not very aside from certain situations, it's not very far off from what it's like right now. You know, if you have the money and the influence and the connections, you can do almost whatever you want without any kind of serious consequences.
Yes, all the stories did deal in ways with this sort of villain as the billionaire who's buying women escorts who are basically robots or whatever they are,
Yeah.
buying new bodies that you can put your brain into if you have the money, and the more money you have, the more beautiful and young the body you can buy to put your brain into. It's a lot of the big rich guy kind of stepping on the little guy with their power.
And on top of that, I mean, we covered Brother Eye a little bit, but this is something that's happening right now. Brother Eye could easily be your Alexa or Siri or something. And it's this satellite that collects data on people. And the way it talks is human. Like, he's very chummy with OMAC. But I feel like the Global Peace Agency had something. If there was a prelude to this, they didn't just build Brother Eye from scratch. They probably collected data. They had it study people. They had the system study people and learn how to be more human and protective. So watch out for your, Alexas and Siris, people. They're out there. They're creating Brother Eye. They're stalking you. All of your information is going on this one satellite collected by this cult-like peace agency.
I was trying to flip back and see how Brother Eye was described, but it doesn't go into much detail. It's more just, this is on page 7 of the first story, the most advanced and complex piece of metal in this dangerous age. It's kind of more vague about what it is and what it does and how. At the end of the first issue, we kind of really see that it is what made OMAC into him. OMAC describes, I've used the powers you gave me when I needed them, Brother Eye. And Brother Eye just says, I shall always help you. We are linked by the eye symbol on your chest. I transmit beams. Some of them bring you my voice. Others feed you instant information. A powerful unseen beam such as this changed Buddy Blank and brought you into being. So it's there is some hint of what you're talking about, feeding instant information and being, the most advanced, piece of machinery, but it is more kind of just left to the imagination, so that we can fill in the gaps with what we know now in the future and say, oh, it is this.
Issue 3 is one of my favorite issues, and I forgot that it was a two-parter. I felt like a lot of these issues, you could pick up random issues of OMAC and kind of get a full story, but some of them do follow a previous issue. So 3 and 4 connect to one another. And it's my favorite in that it opens up with OMAC watching a movie with this headset on. And in 1974, Jack Kirby is predicting virtual reality.
Yes.
And this plot point, unlike, the parents, the adopted parents via algorithm, he brings back virtual reality. He doesn't even mention the parents again. But there's a beautiful double page spread. So in his free time, OMAC watches movies. So I guess that's a connection to Kirby. Kirby was a movie buff.
And this issue has that giant monster and another giant monster in part 2, issue 4, right?
Yeah.
With this bizarre sort of kind of a flying octopus.
What is that? That's how he describes it too. It's like it's just flailing around.
Yeah. And so the virtual reality kind of predicts this battle that pops up in the next issue, right?
And I noted one of my other favorite things is Jack Kirby introducing virtual reality in 1974, but it's also OMAC taking on the military-industrial complex. And I noted he's taking on the military-industrial complex with the power of the military-industrial complex. So it's him taking on this army by himself. They throw in this little plot point that they never mention again. Armies are outlawed. So they send this guy. And to be fair, this is reasonable. You know, the Kafka, this marshal he's going after, is an actual warlord. He's not a guy who's minding his own business. He has done war crimes. And it has OMAC taking all of these people down in this silly floating chair. You know, like
I was going to bring this up because it's not just a floating chair, but how we get there is just great, because it starts as a rocket, and then in space, the rocket comes apart. So OMAC's got, you know, the smaller part of it, which is this big, right? And so then he's flying around in that, missiles shoot at him and blow off the back of it. And so it just keeps getting smaller and smaller, right? Every few panels, something causes it to get smaller. And so we finally get to what you're talking about, because it blows up again and it's down to just the chair. So I love that he's flying around in a chair, but I love that there's a rocket, then the smaller part of the rocket, then, you know, just the nose, and that progression. I was just busting up watching it, getting tinier and tinier and tinier.
It looks like, and I'm glad you brought up that transition, because it goes from something that looks like NASA to a flying massage chair or something. It looks like a budget version of Metron's chair from New Gods. But one of the details that I like is, and I forgot that it has weapons, but they're kind of defensive weapons. Instead of missiles, which would have been silly, this guy sitting in a chair firing missiles just at tanks, it has this chemical that dissolves tanks. He can fly over them, dump this chemical, and he doesn't actually have to kill anyone. I love that it progressively just gets more minimalistic. At some point, bikers launch themselves at OMAC in this floating chair.
And tanks are shooting at him, and he's out flying, you know, the tanks. And this was a fabulous action sequence.
This is really the God of War moment. You know, they're like, he's mad. Everyone has the need to say he's a one-man army corps. You know? But there's a moment where he jacks someone's vehicle and then just starts firing at them with that same vehicle.
And you look at some of these, you know, beautiful action scenes, and like, look at this stuff. Look, the villains have these for weapons, and look how destructive they are. And it's just fantastic.
And you were bringing up earlier how you don't really get much info on Brother Eye. I want to have the comics out because I have some letter pages noted, but people mention, what's up with Brother Eye? What are you going to do about him? It's not until issue 4 that you learn about him a little bit. You know, you learn that he can give OMAC the strength to lift a tank up, so he can increase his strength. There's a moment after they kidnap this marshal where that algorithm and, you know, satellite thing that I was talking about, where they collect all of your data, all you have to do, you don't have to go to court, you don't have a court date, you just go up to a computer, put your hand on the screen, and they have your entire rap sheet and whatever your sentence is all in one go. I don't know if they reserve this for higher, you know, threat levels, or if you like have a parking ticket or something and you go to contest it. It's like you put your hand on there, it's like your rap sheet and then execution. It's like, all I did was run a red light. What, you know?
First of all, there's two things I want to say real quickly. You talked about virtual reality, and whenever we talk about using all these crazy imaginative ideas and predicting the future, I agree. Kirby came up with just so many ideas, and a lot of them are things now. When you mentioned the virtual reality, I was thinking about, hey, what is the history of virtual reality in science fiction? And it looks like there may have been some stuff in the 60s, but really the big virtual reality concept was Neuromancer in 1984 by William Gibson, and so this is what, 78 or something. This is predating that.
Yeah.
And
yeah, 1974 to 1975. So that's like way before.
Yeah. And so I would be interested if Kirby was reading some science fiction, where he picked this up, or if he was just thinking about how much he loves movies and wouldn't it be neat if movies could be like this, and I don't know the answer to that, but
I was thinking of Westworld as well, where it's not virtual reality, but it's a place you can go where your actions don't really have any consequence. You could do whatever you want, and that's kind of a physical video game. What's so far-fetched about putting on a headset and then imagining that happen as well?
Yeah. And this is a lesser-known science fiction writer, Stanislaw Lem, who he's done some brilliant. He's like a thinking man's science fiction writer, real heady stuff. But he's the guy that was dealing with some of these concepts in the 60s. Now I think he's Polish, or his stuff was in Russian, or I don't even know if that material would have been in America, back in the 60s or 70s. But this leads me to my second thing I wanted to discuss, and that is that Kirby's imagination was just so wildly on fire. Just as we've spoken about with the Eternals, here's an idea, oh, I forgot to even finish that idea, but I'm on to this idea. He's just spitting so much stuff out. And when you were just saying, oh, look how he does this, I was thinking, that didn't happen. That didn't come to happen. This hasn't come to happen. Oh, that came to happen. And it makes you think of, just the whole business of prophecy, where if you spit out enough ideas, something's bound to come true, right?
Exactly.
And if you came up with enough ideas that came true, then people look back and go, wow, look at how prophetic this person was. But you're kind of ignoring the misses. So I don't think that Kirby was this amazing prophet. I do think he was just brilliant in this mass production of amazing ideas, many of which have come true. And so not to minimize what he's doing, but just to kind of put into perspective, I don't think it's the same as saying, like if you look at Star Trek, you can say, oh, look, they basically invented cell phones. But it's like that, when people said, wow, look at how the future is, that was the last thing on their mind of this is going to be the future, right? It just happened that they hit on that one thing and said, wow, look how forward thinking they are. Well, yes and no.
I appreciate that, because it goes a step further than just that Kirby is prophetic. We've been talking about Kirby all of these months, and Kirby's my favorite cartoonist, but I'm at the point of my Kirby, I guess it'd be more obsession than appreciation, where you don't want to criticize him. You're not out there being like, oh, Kirby sucks, but you're out there being like, well, he's not a god, he's just a dude. Kirby describes himself dude. For sure. Yeah, I mean, one of a kind. And Kirby describes himself as, my wife handles all the business. I'm just a guy who draws sometimes and eats sandwiches.
What are you going to do now with all your artwork now that you got it back from, who was it, Marvel?
Marvel.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't get all of it back, But what I did get back, I was grateful for. And I leave the disposition of the artwork to my wife. In fact, I leave everything to my wife. And I just draw a bit and eat sandwiches.
No, he's very, despite all of this outlandish stuff, the multi-killer. Where did an organic hydrogen bomb, that looks like an octopus shows up, and he's just this grounded guy who just wants to take care of his family.
I want to point out, because you don't get the full perspective from that distance shot,
no,
that this is an absolute Kirby giant monster.
It reminds me of like Siegfried and the Dragon or something, where it's kind of like they're working on a budget, but I guess for that time period it still looks cool, so they can't afford to show like the whole dragon. They kind of just show the head and he's swinging at it like a crazy person. Again, this idea, we talked about it. It's this flying octopus creature. This is the most outlandish thing he did in the book. There's no precedent for it. Everything that OMAC fights in this story, even after this, is something that happens in real life. Military, like warlords, that's a real thing that happens. People who are out there building weapons to kill people, that actually happens. There's the human trafficking that goes on in issue 5. That actually happened. And then this creature comes out of nowhere. There's no warning. They don't prepare you for this, and all of a sudden it just starts, it blows up. He's like, this thing is becoming a hydrogen bomb.
Now, interestingly, with that context in mind, this monster is introduced like this. It's not a new military concept. Hannibal used elephants, the Nazis bred savage dogs, but in the world that's coming, with biological research geared to war, a ruthless despot produces a living, breathing multi-killer. So Kirby is still trying to frame this in the guise of science, creating this in the lab.
It does come back. This is not a plot thread that he gets rid of. In issue 8, they bring up how Dr. Scuba, the only actual arch nemesis OMAC has, is experimenting on creatures. He has these, I forget what, it's like genetic modification. They experiment on people, or they experiment on creatures, and they try to turn them into something else. And they call atomic manipulation. Yeah. And he has a daughter named Seaweed. And there's a hint where they mention how she was part of an experiment. And part of me, there's no evidence for this anywhere, but I think that he experimented with human DNA and seaweed and just made like this seaweed human amalgamation, like a sentient piece of seaweed that became his daughter.
Yeah, I think without saying it, they suggest that she and her pal, her fiance or whatever, husband, that the two of them both were products of the lab, maybe even created in the lab.
The issue that follows up is one of my favorite issues, in that it's just so dark, but it kind of picks up after that Mr. Big issue in issue 2, where it's rich people can do whatever they want without consequences. And the idea is that these are young people getting kidnapped. The double page spread in issue 5 is really disturbing. There's a guy with a price tag on his chest, and all of these young people are like being carted in. And it's the idea that if you have enough money, you can join this crime cabal. Like, imagine how rich you have to be able to call yourself the crime cabal, and no one can touch you. And you can be immortal. You never have to die. You can just keep being a scumbag. When your body gets old, you can just replace it with a new one.
I want to go back to the scientist in the final issue.
Sure.
I haven't said it yet, but I very much enjoyed this series. I thought it was super fun. It was super out there. It had a lot of crazy ideas, and it just had so much nonstop action. The scientist you know, this is his first appearance, and that face is just amazing.
Yeah.
And this idea of him being the Doctor Doom to Fantastic Four, or the Joker to Batman, you know, this ultimate villain, who and the ultimate villainy is his scientific mind, right? And when we were talking earlier about him making these kids and you know, maybe making monsters like in the previous issue, what's interesting to me is his big thing in this issue is he figured out a way, he invented a device that can absorb a lake worth of water or an ocean worth of water.
Right.
And
he has these bars right here for the people who want to see it.
So when you mentioned that he's doing all this stuff, this gets to what we were saying about, you know, Kirby just had a lot of ideas, but it didn't necessarily predict. Nowadays, scientists, you know, if one scientist is interested in water or how to absorb water, that would be what that scientist does. If one scientist is looking at properties of seaweed, you know, and one person is doing, you know, manipulation of atoms. I think you said it was atom manipulation.
Yeah,
you know,
Kirby's pseudoscience. Right,
and yet this guy, he's a scientist, so he does all this, and he's a master of all these fields. It's a little outrageous to say the least, but it's okay with me. I'm willing to go with that because he is the ultimate villain here.
You mentioned, you know, Dr. Doom, and there's a great interview that Jack did, or it wasn't an interview, but he was at a convention taking questions from people, and he's talking about how Dr. Doom, he's a college-educated man, and he's like, but you look at Dr. Doom, and he's this guy who knows like black magic, and he's an engineer, and he's, you know, and it's all this stuff, and Jack kind of has the umbrella thing that you're mentioning, where it's just he's a smart guy, so by, you know, that definition, he can just do whatever he wants. He can build robots, and he, you know, he can do black magic,
and he can become ruler of a country, because you take a class in politics, and
all you have to do is kill the last guy and take his place, and that's it. That's all you got to do.
And a lot of college educated scientists follow that route in their career.
Yes. Yeah. High turnout of despots. But, you know, we've kind of glossed over each of the issues. It's just an 8-issue series, but unlike some of the books that he did during the 70s, you know, Machine Man had an ending. OMAC had an ending, luckily. I think he did wrap it up in a pretty clean way. You know, people have to keep in mind that Jack was on his way out of DC and back to Marvel, you know.
So let's talk about this. Because I don't know that I agree that this was a clean ending. What happened is this brilliant scientist found a way to revert OMAC back to his human Buddy Blank personage, and then he shot beams up at Brother Eye and placed it in rock, and then what we have here, the final panel says, below the effort has caused an overload in Dr. Scuba's equipment. The island explodes in a gigantic fireball, waroom, and his very success brings destruction to the evil Scuba.
Is this the end? Is this the end? So we don't know what's happened to Brother Eye. We don't know what's happened to OMAC, because Buddy Blank is human on this island that supposedly just blew up. And the backstory to this is that Kirby was planning to do another issue and then left for Marvel. Mm-hmm. And that last panel that I read was different than the panel Kirby had produced Does that
was
panel
gonna lead.
exist? Is that in the original art somewhere, or?
It does. And Christopher, I don't know if you saw those PDFs that Christopher sent. It had the original one. The original said, "Don't miss the climax of the scuba incident. It's a classic. It's The Walking Dead. Unforgettable."
Wow, he predicted The Walking Dead. But jokes, I feel like Kirby would have done something like Mad Bomb and OMAC had he not. He would have. Kirby doesn't really care about the IP. He doesn't care about the costume. He would have just kept doing stories. If he did like Mad Bomb, if he couldn't do it in Captain America, he would have done it in Black Panther. He would have done it in Captain Victory. I think that Kirby would just keep doing stories no matter what. So I would have wanted to see if he even did another issue. Maybe this was just what he had planned and then he was on the way out. He's like, okay, let me just change it to this one. I'm glad that I hope it was Kirby that did this final panel and it wasn't just Frankenstein in there. Like you would have DC do that.
It was
Okay.
Frankenstein in, and he left. And the reason he didn't do the cover for that last issue is because that's how quickly he left.
So yes, I wanted to mention that issue 8 is a Joe Kubert cover, and there are I think he did the last issue of Kirby's OMAC. I believe it not OMAC, Commandy, which was issue 49. And since you're here, since we're doing a one-on-one, I was going to ask you about your Doris Danger comics. We've been kind of hinting, or you've been hinting at it for a while. Fantagraphics is re-releasing Doris Danger.
It's not a re-release. It's all new material. It's going to be a 200 plus page book.
Well, I have this right here.
Yeah.
So it is new stuff. Okay, that was something I was not sure. Okay,
and
great.
It's full color for the first time.
Do you have an estimate or like a release date, or are you still working with people?
We're still kind of early in the stages. I completed the book a couple of years ago and signed the contract with Fantagraphics a couple of years ago, and I was given an editor about a year ago, and just in the last couple months, my editor said he's gotten through the projects that were on deadline, and now I'm in the shoot, and he's assigned an art director who's begun kind of laying it out so that it looks like a Fantagraphics book, and so that's where we're at. Editorially, my editor said things look good. He doesn't anticipate needing to change anything, and basically he'll be planning to publish it as I submitted it to him. As you know, my Doris Danger comics, I'm trying to make them feel like an old comic, including some of the things we were talking about, how there's a bullpen that created these, and an editorial staff, and so the books are partly about the comics, but they're partly about the people who create them, and because of that, there's a fair amount of text features included, and the reason for my art editor is that my editor wants some of those text features cleaned up a little from how I originally presented them, so that it looks more like a Fantagraphics book.
I was trying to look for my copy of the book, but you were talking about how it feels like those 60s monster comics, and there are moments where you read a Doris Danger story and in the corner it's like read like Spla issue whatever, but that issue doesn't really exist. It's just kind of a callback to how it's like you can pick up whatever issue and then there's always a callback to something. There's all this history. So the way I described it, and I wrote about the book a little while back, but it was like a celebration / parody of the 60s monster comics.
And just comics generally. I think, with what you mentioned there, I would add, we talked about all this back when I was collecting comics. You would pick up an issue, and if your mom didn't take you back to the supermarket the next month, you'd miss an issue, or your friend would have an issue from a year ago and you'd read that. So not only would there be holes in what you're reading, but also you're not reading them in order, because you get them in these weird ways, right? Yeah. You save up your $3 to buy the special back issue first appearance of this character, but you don't have any of the issues around it. And so my idea was to present the stories as if you pick them up in those ways. So the continuity is out the window, but as you read, you start to see connections in interesting places. A character will pop up more than once, or maybe you thought a character was dead, but they're not now, and you don't know why. And so it, and then also these are comics from our childhood, and they have this deep meaning to us because they were our first experiences. And if we go back and revisit them, they're often really lousy, but we still have this special bond with them. And so I'm trying to kind of create these kinds of magical feelings and emotions we have for these old memories. And I like to say, I'm trying to capture the greatest and most stupid aspects of these feelings for our comics and memories of comics.
And for people who haven't seen it, here it is right here. This has everything you were talking about. It has like originally published in, it has these crazy monster names. And for those who don't know, it was inked by Dick Ayers. So Kirby inker right there. But yeah, I'm excited that it is new stuff and not a re-release.
Yeah, I wanted to mention too, you said that I'll put like a, didn't Professor Kroot fall off a cliff to his death? Asterisk. Yeah. See issue number 117, fans. And you said, but those issues don't exist. But if you look, I do reference the specific issues that pop up in later volumes, if not that volume. I don't cover all of them, but you would be surprised how many of them do actually reference.
Yeah.
Like it all is a lot more anal than you might realize.
Is that hard to keep up with, or is it planned where it's like, okay, I will
awful.
mention this, or it's like you're working on one, it's like, I'll bring back this guy. Oh, wait, let me go back and look at my notes and other comics. Oh, wait, he showed up in this. Let me cite that.
Yeah, it's maddeningly anal. It's a lot of work, and it's not easy to keep it all straight.
Yeah.
And all the new stories are building on all the old stories in these ways. So I view it as like I heard William Burroughs, when he made Naked Lunch, he took all the pages and he cut up paragraphs and threw them in the air. Yeah. And picked them up, and then that's how he published them. So it's like, if you imagine a whole puzzle, you get the pieces, but not in a narrative order, right? But as you keep getting pieces, oh look, now these 5 pieces fit together, and these 3 pieces fit together, but they're way over here. But oh look, they're starting to come together. Here's a piece that was in between, but I don't have these ones, So it's kind of slowly building a bigger and bigger picture as I produce more and more. This being my 3rd volume now.
We'll do another Kirby talk with all 3 of us in the future. So it was good to talk about this book and not live in the echo chamber of self where it's just like you're reading alone and you're like